Anthonia, you've talked about the role that Ethos Lab has in creating a place where digital and physical spaces interact. And you also recently wrote an opinion piece for Urbanarium's online journal about the fourth place. And it really captured my imagination, but a lot of people aren't familiar with what this means. What is the fourth place?
What a great place to start. Again, thank you so much for having me here to talk about it. And I'll just say, just off the top, around Ethos Lab, we had endeavored to create a third place for young people, and I'll talk a bit about that. But what COVID highlighted, and as well as thinking about creating spaces that acknowledge the technological reality that young people are in, the fourth place stands out as a concept that actually should be named. So for those that are on the call, urban planners that might be in the room as well are familiar with the concept of the third place. And that usually is that space that's between home, which is your first place, work and school might be your second place, and then the third place is your is the place where you hang out. So it could be the pub, it could be that space you hang out on the corner. It could be anywhere where you just kind of randomly meet up with friends. It's a very organic concept. But the fourth place begins to layer on the technology piece, right? That us as 21st century like individuals are operating in these spaces where the digital and physical, the online and offline are getting greater and greater merged. And COVID really highlighted the fact that there's this intersection that happens in these digital spaces. And so that's the fourth place. And then starting to think about how are these fourth places created? Who are they made for? And starting to think about how do we now influence this reality that we're actually all operating in, but haven't actually really named. And so that's how I would define the fourth place. And it's just become so much more relevant as we think about COVID and finding using technology and leveraging technology as those spaces for connection, for creation, and for celebration. They've always kind of been there, but it's now highlighted as extremely important. But who are the creators within those different spaces? And Ethos Lab endeavors to start bringing new faces and empowering young people to be able to contribute to that.
Yeah. I think that the proposition that really resonates with me that Anthonia offers in the journal entry and offers planners and communities alike is the capacity to bring intention to design. She says to act in the fourth place. Now is a moment to act in the fourth place. And that's a really exciting part of the shifts around the purposeful evolution of anti-oppression work in our cities today. So these intentional places created by young Black builders and their families and communities will address some fundamental power issues in our cities, and I think create safer places for young people to have fun and learn in.
Beautiful. Okay, let's start from the top, right? Where it all began.
Ooh.
Anthonia, can you tell us about the sort of initial inspiration for Ethos Labs and its mission, and sort of maybe what the role of young people in this is, particularly racialized youth, and kind of what inspired this focus and sparked this vision for Metro Vancouver around it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I'm not only in urban planning and in emergency management or in my own career, I'm a mother to an amazing 13-year-old girl, and she asked me if she could hang out at the mall, which is the typical third place for many teenagers. And then I thought to myself, well, the mall, is that where you really want to, is that really where you want to go? Which is fine. But I started asking the question, where is that other kind of third place for young people within cities? Particularly looking at innovation spaces as third places. And these types of innovation hubs and hack spaces have been predominantly reserved for adults. So the maker labs or co-working, going with my daughter who was 13 to a space in Toronto, I asked, can she get a membership to this maker space? And they were like, no, she's under the age of 18. And with other maker labs, you need to have an adult there. So it's not a space where young people can kind of freely go into. So I saw that there was this acute issue to not being able to access those spaces. And then taking a step further, when I was trying to find programming for my daughter and thinking about these types of spaces, accessing STEM education there's some barriers associated with that, both from whether it be geography, cost, but there's this really weird network of being able to access it because you either know someone or you're in the private school system that are seeing huge investments in innovation spaces. And so knowing how open STEM and accessible STEM is, and starting to think about the emerging technology space that Vancouver holds, that it just made sense to think about creating this type of innovation space for young people. But as I think about my daughter, who's a young Black girl, it's one thing to start creating coding classes or workshops, but if it doesn't acknowledge her humanity and who she is as a Black youth, and we see in our society what happens now when you don't acknowledge the humanity of varying communities, that you end up actually just rebuilding and perpetuating the same model. So there's no surprise that there continues to be underrepresentation in STEM in STEM fields. And so looking at Vancouver and like why Vancouver, I had an understanding of the ecosystem that was here around artificial intelligence, around virtual reality, and I know that Microsoft is a huge has a huge hub here for that. That it actually made sense to think about that particular space to be in, and as well as beginning to integrate the humanity aspect to it. And so Ethos Lab really centers the humanity of the Black experience in our inclusive design process, meaning we create spaces where Black youth feel respected, protected, and reflected. And we believe in creating spaces that center this humanity. It actually creates an inclusive space for all. And so Ethos Lab is open to all young people, but it allows us to contextualize it with rich histories and backgrounds that allow us to create that diverse future that we want in STEM.
Mm-hmm. You're here.
Amen. And Amy, Urbanarium is an online platform about city making. First, we'll talk maybe a little bit about what brought you and Anthonia together to work on Ethos Labs. Can you talk a little bit about that and also a little more about the role of Urbanarium in this process?
So I invite her into the Henriques Partners architect office that hosts the Urbanarium desk. We get in there and she's like, "Oh my God, how did you get this job?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, tell me about Ethos Lab." So when she describes the vision of Ethos Lab, we start talking about the Microsoft Garage. We watched the video on Sean Hunt developing the transformation mask. So we get in touch with Chris Richards, who is a manager at the Microsoft Garage at Microsoft Vancouver. And he was super keen and hospitable. What we decided to do is come up with a workshop for Ethos Labs co-creation March Break Camp, which was going to be a half-day experience that would involve on-site tours of both Henriques Partners architects to give the participants an idea of like like a Men in Black style architecture office. And right across the street is the beautiful Microsoft Vancouver office. So we were kind of neighbors, and it allowed Chris and I to kind of hook up really quickly and make it happen, like in a physical way. So we were really keen on this workshop. Then the pandemic hits. So we're all at home. No one's working from the office. A couple weeks into the pandemic, Chris and I end up hooking up again over the phone, and we come up with the idea for the Urbanarium Hackathon. Ethos Lab youth take on the 4th place. And at the hackathon, the framing question was, how can urban design, architecture, and technology intersect in a way for youth to co-create community during this time of isolation and social distancing? And here we are, Atlanthos is born. It was the winning idea of the hackathon. So we brought that initial concept into the Urbanarium studio. We had a kids and parents night. So the parents got into one breakout room and the kids got into another. And this studio workshop was about, how do you get to Atlantis anyway? It's an underwater digital arena. How are you going to get there? So this is workshopping through some of those ideas. One of the winning concept, or one of the prizes for the winning hackathon team was the opportunity to present their idea to Gil Kelly, General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability at the City of Vancouver. The Vancouver Plan team wanted to hear all of the ideas on the fourth place that came out of the hackathon. So anyway, here's what Gil had to say following the presentation.
But an observation about how powerful this is for me, because you have taken this moment of great restriction in our lives, the stay at home and all the restrictions going on because of COVID, and use it as a moment to launch your imaginations, and use that to transport you into a new place of your own making, your own imagination, but also a place to connect with friends and others in that kind of new world, which is really amazing. All four of those presentations did that. And, you know, when I think about it as a longtime city planner, that's what we really hope, and our best hopes to do with shaping cities, is tap the collective imagination to create the kind of places we want to be and to share with friends and have productive and fulfilling and happy lives. And so this is such a powerful kind of window into the use of the imagination to create the kind of places we want to create. So I really, really appreciate this. And I'm hoping Karis and company, we can find a way to use this in Vancouver Plan. This is great, and this is exactly the cohort that we want to see help develop the plan. So I just wanted to thank you all very much for that.
Yeah, the whole Vancouver Plan team was super excited about the concepts presented that came out of the hackathon and from the members of Ethos Lab. And one planner said to me, there isn't enough futurism and imagination being put into the Vancouver Plan. So I think, you know, Ethos Lab is really shifting perspectives, offering some really new ways of creating space in Vancouver and Metro Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is just so exciting. And the vision here, right, just as he was saying, is expansive in a time when all of us have been so constricted. And for this activity to begin, right, you were looking for tips on the physical hack space itself. Thanks to COVID, we were, you know, all sort of all collaborating with you and the Ethos Labbers as a result, as one of Microsoft Vancouver's first actual virtual hackathons. Now with the goal of designing this virtual space. So that's a huge pivot.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just going to come back to, again, what we were endeavoring when we launched was creating physical, creative co-working spaces for young people, for them to be able to access. Again, and I think I should make very clear, the young people that were involved are between the ages of 12 to 18. And so these were a lot of the great ideas that came out of them. And so for us, when we initially conceptualized Ethos Lab, we knew that we needed to acknowledge the technological reality of young people. When young people go and hang out, they're looking at their phones, they're all sharing the YouTube, they're all kind of around each other. They're, that's just kind of how they interact. And so how do you meet them where they're at? And we were already there in terms of, this is what should happen in terms of integrating space and technology. But what COVID did was actually accelerate us a number of years in our project plan. The vision was that we would have some sort of online platform in terms of creating a digital community in that kind of way. But because our mind was already there, it was less of a pivot and more of an acceleration into the direction that we already needed to go. So it definitely wasn't easy. And even though it was already a top of mind, but I think that the team really did come together in confidence to be able to say, hey, you know what, let's just do it. And centering, again, co-creation at the center of all of this, that I would never have come up with Atlanthos. In fact, when I heard Atlanthos, I was like, I don't know what to do with this. And so I think it's really interesting as we tell the rest of the journey, what our organization now looks like and manifests.
Now, Anthonia, you have mentioned that you have a history in disaster response.
Mm-hmm.
perhaps made for the times. Do you feel like that experience influenced your ability to pivot Ethos from physical to this virtual space during a global pandemic?
Yeah, and I think just for everyone on the call, it kind of randomly came up in a conversation in terms of my background. But yeah, I spent 15 years in emergency management, managing major events, to forest fires, to working in with Department of National Defense on emergency response. So when you are working with disasters, you're thinking about programs, plans, and infrastructure to help mitigate or prevent disasters that are happening. And in fact, actually, Ethos Lab was created seeing the impending emergency that was, Black youth in particular being a part of our digital future and builders in our digital future. And so creating a community where not only are they they're held with their diverse peers was extremely essential to actually being able to think through, how do we address this issue? So I'm also an urban planner as well. So Ethos Lab was just like the merging of kind of the different sides of my being. And so that was the question I got from some people, like, did you think about this after COVID? And the answer is that we were already there, because you can see kind of the writing on the wall, and COVID has really shown that when you do exclude members of community, there are these issues around the digital divide is very, very real in exacerbating the isolation caused by COVID. We see the inequality in access to whether it be income disparity, health impacts, all those different things around exclusion. So I think what we wanted to do was, again, Ethos Lab was this response to, hey, how do we make it, how do we actually address it earlier on, right when they're young, to start thinking about creating not only those social connections and the humanity, but also, giving them the technical skills to also make things real. So we say that we want to create creators and not consumers.
Awesome. And it didn't stop there. Once the virtual space was designed in partnership with Microsoft, then there was this opportunity for the global hackathon that came in July as a Hack for Good project. Tell us about what happened there. What were you aiming at to see kind of at the end of Hack Week?
Yeah, so we had those amazing designs that Amy shared, and we're like, hey, let's see if we can hack and build out those digital spaces. But knowing the limitations of Hack Week, that wasn't exactly plausible. But we knew that we're going to have this digital platform, and we knew that we were going to have this physical space. And so what was great was that connected with Jessica to think through, how do we now create a web application that actually brings all of it together to create this one window experience into Ethos Lab.
Awesome. And we've got Jessica on the line. I would love to bring you in, Jessica, to maybe talk a little bit more about how word got over to you about this Hack for Good opportunity. And you actually led the team of Microsoft hackers who designed and planned an initial architecture for the Ethos Lab virtual platform. Can you tell us about that experience and that group?
Yes. Thank you, Aheri. So it was actually very random. Chris from the garage spoke earlier in this conversation, reached out to me because I lead the Africans at Microsoft Vancouver chapter. And he said, hey, there's this, team that is trying to build out this virtual space for Black youth in the city. And as Africans at Microsoft, I mean, it was instant, right? It resonated so much with what we're trying to do. And it was such an easy idea to sell to our people. So that was how, I came into that initial meeting with Anthonia and some members of her team. And it was pretty much just breaking down what could we do in this space. And if I remember correctly, at the time, it was still very much focused on that physical space and what that would look like. So maybe having people from our team going over there to lead some form of webinar or trainings in tech things, and just thinking back at how much things have grown and evolved to where we are right now, I'm so happy and proud to be part of this story.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, you mentioned, and we saw a few photos, I think, of kind of that physical, that first physical set of collaborations. But and can you tell us a little bit more about the Blacks at Microsoft ERG? You mentioned them, and we've been hearing that come back up. How are they involved, kind of in the end with this?
Yeah. So the Africans at Microsoft is a community within the Black at Microsoft ERG, which was formed to represent the growing and diverse African community here in Microsoft and here in Vancouver. Here in Vancouver, we have about 40 members, but worldwide, upwards of 800. And beyond building ourselves to be better employees, we're very intentional about capacity building within the community. One of my favorite authors and speakers, Toni Morrison, said it best when she said, when you get those jobs that you've so brilliantly trained for, remember that your real job is that if you are free, you need to free someone else, right? If you have some power, you have to empower someone else. So as people in this community who are so lucky and so blessed to be where we are, mobilizing for an initiative like the Ethos Lab and Atlanthos through Hack for Good was just one of the many ways that we hope to empower people and minorities in tech within the city. So through Africans at Microsoft, I obviously had that initial set of volunteers for the hackathon. But beyond that, through the garage here in Vancouver, I was able to recruit or influence people to join our team and join building up this web app / platform to enable Ethos Lab to continue their mission and their vision, their dream. So that's just about it. Yeah.
What an immense opportunity, and really a demonstration of what it looks like when we look at our own sort of more globally, our responsibilities and the fact that we truly are knit together as a community, and that it is a privilege to be able to have the capability to bring others kind of into that joint creative experience and really make our community even stronger. So thank you for that. I want to, and we'll highlight a little bit for folks who are interested in becoming more involved in activities of this sort at the end. But I want to make sure that we get the whole story here. So following the hackathon, Jessica, you and MS Van and really, that really dedicated community of Africans at Microsoft passed the baton over to Jacob, who's joining us with his team at Active Replica. And it was Active Replica, welcome Jacob, who helped build out Atlanthos, the Ethos Lab virtual platform. And it sounds like it was really just in the matter of a few weeks. Can you tell us about this process?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I want to say thanks for having me here, and that it's been a huge privilege, again, having an opportunity to work on such an amazing and creative project like this, and meaningful, right? So really appreciate being part of the conversation. Yeah, so we've got a background in augmented and virtual reality, and recently we've been exploring accessible social spaces in virtual reality, and that's how we first started the conversation with Anthonia. And one of the really exciting things here about the Atlanthos project was the youth-driven creativity, right? So all of the concept art and the sketches, and then the youth ended up actually, the majority of the content in the space itself was created by the youth. And so what we did was mostly stepped out of the way as much as possible and did the technical tying together of the system that was necessary, but it was really wonderful to enable people who didn't necessarily currently have the skills to build a space like this to be able to have this vision and create some assets for it, and then actually see that come alive, and really be super empowering that in that way. So yeah, that's a snapshot of what it looked like.
Awesome. And it sounds like one of the biggest challenges that you faced in building out this virtual Atlanthos was finding avatars that were representative of Black youth. That challenge really kind of shines a light on Ethos's core mission, seeing Black youth in the development phases of emerging technology. Can you expand on that concept a little?
Yeah, absolutely. So we built Atlanthos on top of an open source social platform called Mozilla Hubs. And a lot of the default avatars there are things like robots and elephants and penguins, but not very many human style avatars. There are a number of third-party systems for avatar creation, but often they aren't actually as representative as we would like, obviously, and especially for the Atlanthos youth. The ones that we did find, even if they had a representative like skin color and hair and stuff like that, they always portrayed middle-aged or older people. Which again, if you're a little 13-year-old, it's so hard to get something that actually feels natural to you. And the process of building something from scratch, bespoke, is also a tricky process, right? Because you want people to feel that they're represented in the space, and when you don't see yourself represented in the space, there's a dissonance between yourself and your presence within the space, right? So what we ended up doing, and I'd love to get Anthonia's input here too, is we worked with the management team at Ethos, and we decided to actually go the opposite route. And so because we were working on getting something in people's hands as quickly as possible, rather than going and falling into the uncanny valley, instead we went with a largely abstract version. And we're hoping to work with the youth to let them, as they drove the space, drive the creation of the avatar process as well. So we went with these simple geometric shapes for the youth to have in the spaces there as an platform. And then we're going to work with them to build out what they actually want to see in the space, rather than us telling them the type of face that they're going to have. So, yeah. But I'd love to get some feedback from Anthonia too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was I remember Jacob saying to me, I don't feel comfortable handing over a platform where these kids don't feel that are represented, right? And in a project that is like this, that is centered around the humanity of the Black experience, it really does push that conversation around representation, where I know I've been in other conversations on project scope where someone might say, oh, it's out of scope, we'll put in something in here. I think Jacob and Active Replica were operated ethically and with true intention of understanding the importance of what it means to see yourself in space, and with also talking to our board and other and members of our group, the ability for them not to just dress up an avatar, but to build an avatar is really important for them to understand those technical pieces. So when we talk about Atlanthos and them seeing themselves in there, it was really, we did 3D modeling courses so that they could put in 3D model assets in there, and even to design. So they may not have necessarily seen themselves as avatars, but it was reflected in other ways, that there were different pieces from the pattern that is created there, which ended up forming the carpets, to the watercolor being part of the ceiling, to some of the different pieces of art that the young people just developed so that they could dress the space. And then there's our little secret library room where actually the chairs and the table were made by one of the young people. And it's just so great to see when a young person goes inside the space and they're like, wait, I did that, and are able to show their parents that they did that. It's really powerful. And when we talk about, again, centering the humanity of the Black experience and really bringing in culture, like the floor covering is a mud cloth, and being very intentional about putting in different cultural pieces as well, to again just try and tie it back to our design mission. This phenomenal piece was created by a 12-year-old by the name of Savion, and an experienced illustrator. And again, this comes back to our co-creation driven approach. This is called Afrofuturistic Playground. And over an intensive 10 days where Savion sketched for 16 hours in one day as well, to get these illustrations extremely powerful. And it was around the time that Chadwick Boseman had passed away. And they really wanted to honor it, honor his passing, honor the history of African history, but as well you can see the Vancouver mountains in the background. And what my favorite part of the piece is the basketball net is all the way in the back, and that it's actually not about the sport of basketball. It's about the two people that are playing one-on-one. It's about really centering ourselves. So it was absolutely beautiful, and Savion and Jabola out of Toronto did a fantastic job on this piece. And so that's one of the murals that is found in Atlanthos. Again, another shout out to amazing community that supported us in this work. Jay Castro, who sketched out so one of the important things for young people to see in this space was sushi. Every young person was like, I need to see sushi in this space. And so he sketched out the sushi. They too also sketched out, and Active Replica has created a replication, in fact, a one-to-one of Sushi Island.
You gotta have sushi in an underwater digital arena.
Yeah. The concern again is it's still in development, but they were like vegetarian sushi. But this is so beautiful. It is what it is. And then you can see our relationship with Urbanarium continued in bringing in the amazing sketcher of Kristen, who had a strong relationship right from the hackathon all the way to the end. It was just great to have that continuity. And so even when you see the carpets and the rugs that were sketched out, Dequa's patterns now take that space where the patterns are, but you'll see some reflections of her furniture in the space. And then this was the gray box. This was just the beginnings of what the space could be. And you'll see on the next slide, I believe we get to really show what the fruits have been of co-creation, all the different partners coming together, and what it means to create, collaborate, and celebrate in the Ethos Lab environment called Atlanthos.
Wow. Oh, wow. So exciting. Nicely done, Jacob.
Well done, Jacob.
Jacob, Amy, can you tell me about the ways that working with Ethos Lab in this first virtual hackathon shifted how you, an Active Replica, Urbanarium, think about process within your organizations?
Oh, massive shifts for us. Really quickly, the two key shifts, I guess, are working with young people and working as much as possible with a co-creation model ourselves. I mean, we learned a lot through working with the Ethos Lab in this whole journey. So I told you about their studio program, which kind of came out of the Hackathon Ethos Lab experience and relationship. But the second is a civic education program that we're developing with City Hive. And this is a 101 a City 101 curriculum currently not offered in Vancouver, where K to 12 students in BC are underprepared to engage meaningfully in democratic institutions and processes that affect their daily lives. So while education curriculum may cover, the structure of provincial and federal governments, rarely do young people graduate with a yearning to become active citizens. And the know-how to engage with their municipal governments. So that's a really important part of this. And what we've started doing is pulling out pulling out young people from the Ethos community to be educators and facilitators and help other young people draw their city. So we, the participants in Atlanthos development and in Ethos Lab in general, they're just becoming expert level city makers. So we're kind of bringing them into our larger conversations and wanting to kind of share their experience with young people. But it's shifted Urbanarium tremendously. Jacob?
Yeah, and on the active replica front, like Amy said, just tons of learning. One of the things that really stood out to me was the importance of actual living communities inhabiting these digital spaces, right? So many social digital spaces are filled with strangers, right? Whether that's, video games or social VR right now, or even, your social media feeds, they're often strangers. And so having a dedicated space for people who know each other to come, and the way that they spoke and engaged with each other had a type of vibrancy that you don't actually see really in the current social sphere, digital sphere, which was really fascinating. And the engagement and the creativity of the youth, right? Both just the type of things that they were thinking about was absolutely fantastic. But also, again, one of the ways that we've been able to move so quickly with Ethos on this project is the vision of Atlanthos as kind of a living thing, right? It's not like it's something that's built and complete, right? It's something where it's like, okay, hey, here's a starting point. Let's see how it feels. Now let's take it this way, and what do the youth want to see reflected, rather than building the whole thing out ahead of time. It's more letting the community also shape the space in a really organic way is something that I'm really inspired by. And then also the last piece is that how empowering it is to the youth when they're able to actually, again, see their work reflected in the real world in this particular way. And the level of creativity is empowering, right? And so when the act of creation is empowering. And by doing these beautiful paintings and seeing them in the space, and by doing the 3D modeling and then having that again reflected and having all their friends, their family see it, it's something that I think has intense emotional impact.
Yeah,
it sure does. And I have to say, I think it would be hard not to be emotionally impacted by both the story of how all this came together and this vision, and having a moment to be able to walk into that Atlanthos experience and that vibrancy. And really, it's a deeper, perhaps like you were talking about, engagement that I think is really only possible when we feel a sense of belonging, when we feel intentionally included. And perhaps even more so for youth who are not represented at the ballots and maybe do not feel like they have been asked to be civically engaged. So in fact, this idea of belonging and inclusion is really amplified for anyone who is a part of the youth population, which means that any members of the youth population here in Vancouver could benefit from being immersed, perhaps underwater, in Atlanthos.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to quickly jump in there, but just that the young people that participated in the hackathon would not traditionally say that they were like STEM or tech people. That there were varying interests, many athletes, many just loving books, crafters, that it was their first time ever participating in a hackathon, and even communicating back, I never thought I could be a part of a hackathon, as like a first step to, I never thought I could do 3D modeling. It always seemed so hard. And I think also with the Ethos Lab team, we were learning alongside with them. So that I think also made it really fun, and seeing their parents also learning alongside, I think was really great. So it's just, there is a curiosity and a richness there that they just said, if we just give them the tools and the opportunity to do it, they will do it. And as Jacob said, get out of the way.
Yes.
Yeah, well, and even these opportunities of us all working together when opportunities arise, providing Ethos Lab youth with more professional development, like Dequa going to the Arts Umbrella Architecture Intensive, who was, we met at the Hackathon, who was really involved in the studio process of building out the Atlanthos idea, and now is kind of being trained in different ways to think about building and space, and can apply that ongoing knowledge to the living, breathing Atlanthos. So I think that's why the friendships will stay, and when opportunities arise, just giving Ethos Lab youth opportunities to learn more so they can build more stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And Anthonia, maybe you can speak a little bit more towards where you see the role of VR and virtual environments sort of evolving in the lives of Ethos Labbers as they gain some more experience collaborating, as we've seen them already doing in that world.
Yeah, no, I definitely, Jacob and I have many conversations around this, and he'll definitely speak more jumping off of this. But we do see, again, there this kind of the ubiquity of VR kind of coming, right, and that they need to be a part of being able to create and build and be in that space and see themselves in the space in a meaningful way. It's not about just having that selection of the Black avatar necessarily that makes you connect to it. It's how does the avatar move? How was it built? What is the intention around that particular being in that space? That I think Ethos Lab, in that desire to again bring humanity forth through technology, it's not only just like building those pieces, but like getting to the intention and those conversations early on in the process with young people, to be able to think about the intention of their design, and not just as Jay Pitter talks about design not being neutral. From an urban planning standpoint, design, and we know this through technology, is also not neutral, that there are biases embedded into it. And so you could also have a Black person designing the avatar, but what about like but you might a Black person who is 40 years old designing a avatar for the 12-year-old, like there's still that disconnect. And so I think as much as possible, if we can have the young people in their real lives help define their own identities, that they too also feel empowered to build into these spaces. And I think Jacob has some really great thoughts in this, or just in general around the future of AR/VR.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think, we're circling around the point, every step of the way, which again is the difference between creation versus consumption, right? And I think as a society, we're being so indoctrinated as consumers, right? And like passively letting all of the information be chosen for us, and that it's almost like an act of resistance to a certain level to realize that you can shape the world that is being created around you, and helping youth learn that as early as possible, and actually making the space for them to be creators and encouraging that, I think is a really important part of the conversation. And especially as it relates to augmented and virtual reality, where the technology is so nascent that kind of like everybody right now has a seat at the table, right? If you look at established technologies like television, for example, or Hollywood, or even the internet, they're very rigid, right? Like they might be moving, but they're only moving because the big players are making choices to move them in particular directions, right? Whereas with nascent technology that's still in this kind of like liminal stage where it's figuring out what it is, the impact that a few voices can have can actually shift the direction of the entire lifetime of the technology, right? And especially right now, while everyone has a seat at the table and while everyone has a voice, this is a very impactful time to be having these conversations, because I think we'll see impacts 10 years from now based off of the type of conversations that are happening around these tables right now. Yeah, even one slightly different example, right? But there's I see so much vocalization around the women in VR movement, right? There's a lot of women in VR groups. There's a lot of dialogue around this in a way that I don't think I've seen that in the existing technology, Silicon Valley kind of established companies. I think the fact that we're having such conversations around inclusivity right now means that 10 years from now, we're going to see a much higher percentage of representation across the spectrum within the augmented and virtual reality industry compared to some of these more traditional mediums.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for bringing us full circle on that again. So I want to just bring back, you know, we're really talking about co-creating our city, not just in a physical space, but in this fourth place, and in shared safe places where we can interact, even in the time of major, you know, a global pandemic. Amy, Urbanarium is a platform for dialogue about intelligent, engaged, conscious city making. When maybe folks like me think about city making in our minds, we usually tend to jump to buildings and infrastructure and transit systems. But Urbanarium understands that a city is more than just that physical structure that's making it up. So can you just kind of tell us a little bit more about how Urbanarium incorporates the fourth place, Ethos Lab and Atlanthos into conversations about city making, and what impacts that can have on how cities and societies, and particularly Vancouver, function?
Yeah, well, I think Urbanarium really believes in the promise of cities. And, you know, amidst the pandemic, being in a city was fraught with a lot of inequity. Neighborhoods were experiencing the pandemic in very different ways. I think the development of fourth place is really important when we think to the future and not kind of knowing what measures will be in place. And what's really important, and I think what Urbanarium is wanting to advocate for, is youth driving design. Like, planners have traditionally struggled to engage with young people. And fourth place is that intersection between first, second, and third. And Ethos Lab is really leading the conversation on these intersectional approaches and thinking about technology and space in ways that maybe you know, cities, planners, etc., in traditional ways have not been able to kind of tap into that way of doing it. So, you know, how can urban design, architecture, and technology intersect in a way for young people to co-create community? I think that's what we're learning right now. I think that's what the city needs to learn, and I think there's an appetite for it. So digital space is really important, and that's why we're working closely, like, with the Vancouver Plan team of thinking about rolling out digital space within, you know, a future 2050 version of Vancouver. Mm-hmm. Where do these places exist? How do they exist? How are they funded? How are they sustained? Is it, you know, a community, private, earned revenue model? Like, I think there's a lot of exploration into the embedding of these spaces within our city model, but you know, this is kind of where Atlanthos, Ethos Lab, Jacob's work, Microsoft's work is going.
That is why this is so exciting for me personally, coming to Canada and having a vision of thriving, not just myself, but multi-generationally, coming from the US to this country, and being able to spark and be involved in community building that can sustain my children, their children, and future generations in a supportive community environment. I also want to really invite the Microsoft community that perhaps I'm representing a bit of, but we're all sort of in this together. We are at a moment where we can envision what it looks like to invest, just like Jacob is saying. You know, there are moments where 50 people pushing now is worth 5,000 people pushing when the status quo is already established.